There are moments that remind us why so many people still long for Barack Obama's leadership. What began as a simple speech slowly transformed into a lesson few in that room would forget. It was meant to be routine, almost ceremonial, yet it turned into a powerful example of how grace can quietly overpower arrogance. The day itself carried weight. Washington, D.C. was hosting one of its most anticipated leadership forums, an event that drew global dignitaries, political figures, and business leaders from around the world. The atmosphere felt different from the start, and the reason was clear to anyone who glanced toward the front row. Seated there were three figures who didn't just shape politics, but divided it: Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Baron Trump. Each represented something entirely distinct. Obama embodied calm and calculation, the steady voice of diplomacy. Trump projected force and confrontation, a symbol of raw power. Baron sat beside him, young and self-assured, still finding his own voice, yet carrying a last name that dominated headlines across America. The hall was filled to capacity. Energy buzzed through the air as reporters whispered predictions and photographers fine-tuned their cameras. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes drifting repeatedly toward the stage. With all three men in the same room, everyone sensed that something memorable was inevitable. The stage glowed with red, white, and blue. Flags lined the walls, and warm golden lights reflected off the polished floor. The host, a familiar political commentator, stepped up to the microphone with a careful smile that hinted at nerves. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome our first speaker, former President of the United States, Barack Obama." Applause filled the hall. Some people rose to their feet, others clapped softly, but nearly everyone leaned forward. Moments later, Obama appeared from the side of the stage, tall, composed, unhurried. He didn't rush or gesture for attention. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded the room. He offered a small nod and began. He thanked the audience and spoke as if he were having a genuine conversation, not delivering a rehearsed address. His voice was warm and steady, the kind that made people listen without realizing why. He paused, scanning the room, then shifted to something familiar to everyone present: the rising cost of living, groceries, rent, fuel. He spoke about how millions of hardworking families were feeling the pressure every single day. The room fell quiet. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning became noticeable. He explained that inflation wasn't just an abstract concept or a statistic on a screen. It was parents skipping meals so their children could eat, families holding their breath every time a bill arrived. Heads nodded across the audience. Soft whispers spread, then faded. Even those who disagreed with him politically couldn't deny the truth behind his words. His tone grew firmer, but not louder. Leadership, he said, wasn't about blaming whoever came before or whoever might come next. Real leadership meant standing up in the present and asking what could be done together, right now. Applause rolled through the hall. Obama smiled slightly, took a sip of water, and continued. He spoke about teamwork, accountability, and compassion. He never mentioned names, yet everyone felt the weight of current politics hanging in the air. In the front row, Donald Trump sat rigid, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the stage. His expression never shifted, but the tension was unmistakable. Silence, in that moment, said more than any interruption ever could. Beside him, Baron sat tall and attentive, his phone placed face down on the table. He looked calm, curious, fully aware that he was witnessing a moment where history and legacy crossed paths. Obama closed with a line that drew quiet respect from the room. "A nation," he said, "doesn't rise because one person wins. It rises when people stand together, even when it's difficult. Leadership isn't about pointing fingers. It's about lifting hands." The applause was long and loud. Many stood once again. Even those on the opposite side of the political aisle couldn't help but clap. Obama stepped back, nodding in appreciation as camera flashes lit the room. He looked composed, reflective, the image of quiet confidence. But while the hall celebrated, tension quietly built in the front row. Trump leaned slightly toward his son. No one could hear his words, but Barron's lips curled into a brief smirk before fading. Trump's gaze stayed locked on Obama, his expression hardening as he tapped his finger against the table, waiting. The host returned to the microphone, his smile more strained than before. He thanked Obama, calling the speech powerful. The applause slowly faded, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Then came the announcement everyone expected. The next speaker would be President Donald J. Trump. Obama took his seat. Trump stood, buttoned his jacket, adjusted his tie, and flashed a smile that felt more like a challenge than warmth. The audience held its breath. Cameras shifted, pens were raised. Trump approached the podium deliberately, absorbing the attention. Flashbulbs popped across the hall. He paused, looked out over the crowd, then leaned into the microphone with that familiar half-smirk. "Well," he began. His tone was edged with sarcasm. "That was quite a speech, wasn't it?" A few nervous laughs scattered through the crowd, while others stayed silent. They recognized that tone immediately. Trump continued, speaking about unity and togetherness, about sharing burdens. He made it sound pleasant on the surface, then paused. His voice dropped, sharper now. The problems people were facing, he said, didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't suddenly appear. According to him, they began years ago, when Obama was in charge. The room went still. There was no warm-up, no soft landing. Trump went straight for confrontation. He gestured toward the audience, emphasizing every word. People couldn't afford groceries. Gas prices were soaring. Families were struggling. And in his words, the foundation for all of it had already been built. A ripple of reaction moved through the hall. Reporters wrote furiously. Cameras zoomed in on Obama's face, calm, unmoved. Trump kept pushing, his voice filling the room. He spoke about responsibility, about failure, about people still hurting because of what he called unfinished damage. Some clapped, others sat frozen, unsure whether they were watching a political address or a personal attack. Obama didn't react. He didn't interrupt. He sat back with his hands folded, his expression steady, almost unreadable. Trump paced slightly, listing issues one by one. Inflation, jobs, borders. He said it all traced back to bad decisions. He talked about listening to people, about hearing exhaustion in their voices, about a country that was tired. The last word lingered in the air. The host shifted uncomfortably. A few whispers rose and fell, but Trump wasn't done. He spoke about coming into office promising change, about fighting resistance, about doing things differently. He said they told the truth, even when people didn't like it. He glanced toward Obama, his words thick with sarcasm. They hadn't stood there pretending everything was fine. The room felt heavy now. Every eye bounced between the two men, one composed, the other burning with intensity. Trump leaned closer to the microphone again. He said Obama sounded thoughtful, but talk was cheap. While one man spoke, people struggled. Families lost homes. The country paid the price. The reaction split the room. Loud claps from some, soft boos from others. The divide was visible, almost physical, and Trump seemed energized by it. He smiled, reminding everyone that smooth speeches and polished words meant nothing without results. The noise grew again. Trump stood tall, confident, for a moment appearing to command the entire hall. But one person remained unmoved. Obama sat quietly, calm, collected. He looked up at Trump, nodded once, and allowed a faint, knowing smile to appear. It wasn't mocking, it was patient, familiar, as if to say he'd seen moments like this before. That smile changed everything. The camera caught it, projecting it onto the large screen. The audience noticed. Trump noticed. His smile faded. The energy shifted. Applause stopped. Whispers returned. Trump stepped back, glanced at Barron, then back at the crowd. And in one quick motion, he turned the microphone toward his son. He said Barron had something to say. Barron looked surprised, almost hesitant. But his father's stare made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Barron leaned forward, adjusted the microphone, and cleared his throat. The hall went completely silent. Even the photographers paused. Seconds stretched. Heavy seconds. Then Barron spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, edged with confidence. And in just a few moments he said something that redirected the entire night. What followed wasn't just unexpected. It was the spark that ignited the biggest confrontation of the event. The room froze. Every gaze shifted to Baron Trump. He sat forward, tall and composed, pressure written just beneath the surface. The spotlight had been handed to him in front of the world. He adjusted the microphone again and took a slow breath. No whispers, no movement. Silence filled the space. Then, with a faint smile, he began. He spoke about appreciating speeches on unity and compassion, especially, he said, when they came from someone he claimed had once divided the nation. Gasps echoed. A few uneasy claps followed. Obama remained still, eyes focused on Barron. Barron continued, quoting his father about leadership and truth, about asking questions others avoided. Then he delivered the line that made the entire hall hold its breath. He suggested that some people still questioned whether every president had truly been meant to lead the country. The meaning landed instantly. A wave of shock moved through the audience. The old, ugly rumor had been dragged back into the room. Standing just feet from Obama, Barron had revived it. Trump smiled, satisfied. But the rest of the room did not. Some guests stared down at their tables. Others looked away. The host froze, uncertain whether to step in. The atmosphere shifted from tense to deeply uncomfortable. Obama sat perfectly still. His eyes never left Barron. No anger, no shock, just silence. Deliberate silence. Barron glanced around, enjoying the attention for a brief moment. He leaned back, folded his hands, and looked toward his father for approval. Trump nodded firmly, pleased. But across the hall, the discomfort grew heavier. Finally, Obama broke the silence, not with words, with a small, controlled smile, not defensive, not mocking, just calm, the kind of smile that made everyone wonder what would come next. A few rows back, someone whispered that he surely wasn't going to let that slide. Obama didn't react, not yet. He took a slow breath, folded his arms, and waited. That pause carried weight. It pulled people forward in their seats, building anticipation for what would come next. Trump saw the calm and mistook it for weakness. He turned back to the audience and said that this was exactly what he meant. No answer, no defense, just words. He let out a soft laugh. Barron smiled again, but that moment of confidence didn't last. Because behind that calm exterior, Obama was ready to flip the entire moment. After what felt like a long stretch of silence, Obama stood. No rush, no anger. He simply walked toward the microphone. The room fell completely silent again. Even the sound crew froze. Obama looked across the audience, then directly at Barron. His voice was low, calm, and precise. He said he'd been in politics a long time and had heard many things, some smart, some not. But mocking someone else's story, he said, never makes your own story stronger. He turned briefly toward Trump, adding that repeating the same old lines doesn't suddenly make them true. Then he faced Barron again, gentle but firm. What you just did, he explained, wasn't confidence. It was imitation. You picked up your father's tone without his experience, and that combination, he warned, is dangerous. The air tightened. Each word landed slowly, deliberately. Obama continued, his voice steady but sharper now. He asked Barron a question. You question where I come from, he said. But do you even know where you come from? Are you Ivanka's child or Melania's? The words struck like lightning. Gasps rippled through the hall. Cameras flashed. Heads turned. Barron froze, the color draining from his face. He looked toward his father, but Trump stayed silent. Obama paused again, letting the weight of his words sink in. Barron's mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. Trump's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He leaned toward his son and muttered something sharp and low. Then, louder, for the room to hear, he told him to go wait in the car. Another wave of gasps. Barron hesitated, glancing around awkwardly, then slowly stood. Every step toward the exit echoed through the hall. Obama didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He stood composed, calm, almost fatherly. When Barron disappeared behind the curtain, the silence lingered like smoke. Trump's face flushed with anger. He raised his hand toward the microphone, ready to respond. But Obama spoke first. Softly, he said that when families turn insults into habits, they forget what respect looks like. And when respect disappears, so does leadership. The simplicity of the words made them devastating. Trump froze. No one in the audience moved. Obama stepped back from the microphone, allowing the silence to do its work. Then, with a calm nod, he returned to his seat. That moment, a brief act of mockery followed by pure composure, became the defining image of the night. Obama never raised his voice. He didn't insult. He didn't shout. He simply reminded everyone that real power doesn't need noise, it needs control. The silence after Barron's exit felt endless. You could almost hear the air moving in that grand hall, thick with shock and disbelief. Trump sat rigid, eyes locked on Obama. For the first time that evening, the balance of power had shifted. Obama didn't rush to speak. He sat with his hands folded, letting the moment settle. Then, in his familiar calm tone, he began again. He said that during his presidency, he faced criticism every single day, some fair, some not. That, he explained, was part of leadership. But he had learned something important. You can't answer every insult. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting ever could. The crowd listened intently. Trump leaned forward, ready to interrupt, but Obama gently raised a hand without breaking his composure. He continued, saying that what had just happened was worth reflecting on. He glanced toward the empty seat where Barron had been moments earlier. The moment a son repeated a line meant to divide, meant to question someone's place in this country, he realized it was no longer just about politics. It was about the lessons being passed down. The room grew still again. When a child mocks instead of asking questions, Obama said, "It isn't only the child's fault. It reflects what that child has been taught. And that's the danger of anger left unchecked. It spreads." Trump shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. Obama took a slow breath and spoke about patterns he'd seen before. Personal attacks, mockery, distractions. The same playbook repeated again and again. He said it started with Trump, passed through his family, and now reached his son. A murmur moved through the audience. People leaned forward, eyes wide. Then Obama looked directly at Trump and asked a question that hung heavy in the air. Families are meant to lift each other up. But what happens when the family itself becomes the stage for attack? For once, Trump had no quick response. Obama paused, then turned back to the audience. He quoted a line from Jasmine Crockett, saying that truth doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to look at it. The name alone shifted the room. Everyone knew her reputation for bringing facts where others brought noise. Obama continued, measured and controlled. She had presented evidence, real evidence, about behavior and connections within powerful families. Evidence that made people uncomfortable. Trump's expression hardened. Obama's tone softened slightly. He said he didn't repeat rumors, he stuck to facts. And the truth, he added, is that when powerful men speak about women, even their own daughters, as objects of comparison, something is deeply wrong. Gasps echoed. Obama looked out over the crowd, his voice steady, almost heavy with disappointment. He quoted Trump's own words from years earlier about Ivanka, explaining that this wasn't leadership. It wasn't pride. It was a man confusing love with vanity. Trump sat there, eyes wide, furious, and for the first time that night, completely speechless. Obama stepped back, giving the audience space to absorb what he had said. The room was still, yet charged, the kind of silence that feels louder than any applause. Then he spoke again, calmly explaining that leadership isn't about mocking others. It's about mentoring. It isn't about tearing down someone else's name, but about building your own with dignity. He turned toward the crowd, his voice softening, carrying that familiar warmth that could challenge and heal at the same time. When we raise children, he said, whether they grow up in the White House or in a small apartment, we teach them by example. If all they witness is bitterness, that's what they become. If all they hear is anger, that becomes their language. But when they see respect, even toward those they disagree with, they learn what real strength looks like. By then, even those who had arrived as Trump supporters were silent. This was no longer a debate. It was a lesson. Obama took a final sip of water, set the glass down, and offered a faint smile. He said he wasn't there to win an argument. He was there to remind everyone, especially the next generation, that leadership isn't about always being right. It's about being real. He looked at Trump one last time and spoke about how power can turn into pride, and pride into cruelty, and how that's when a nation begins to lose its heart. The applause started quietly, hesitant at first, as if people were unsure what would happen next. Then it grew, swelling into a wave of clapping that filled the hall. Trump remained seated, his face tight with frustration, hands gripping the armrests. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Somewhere inside, he knew that the moment he did, he would lose the room completely. Obama nodded in thanks, stepped away from the podium, and walked calmly toward the exit. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, just quiet strength. Cameras followed him as he left the stage. Behind him, Trump sat motionless. The contrast said more than words ever could. One man had shouted, the other had spoken. Only one walked away with his dignity intact. As Obama left the stage, the atmosphere felt unreal. There were no wild cheers, no shouting, just silence. Not confusion, but recognition. People knew they had just witnessed something rare, a moment of truth. Obama didn't look back. His steps were steady, his expression composed. Each stride toward the exit felt heavier than applause. The lights caught his face, calm and dignified. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any sound bite ever could. At the front of the hall, Trump remained seated, still processing what had happened. Barron hadn't returned. Supporters whispered among themselves, uneasy, careful not to speak too loudly. For once, Trump wasn't controlling the moment. Obama was. Even in his absence, he still held the room. Power without volume. Control without force. Respect without demand. Outside, the cool night air greeted Obama as he stepped through the doors. Reporters rushed forward, microphones raised, hoping for a reaction. Obama smiled politely, lifted a hand, and wished them a good evening, reminding everyone to take a breath. Then he got into his car and left. No extra words, no gloating, just class. Inside the hall, shock still lingered. The host eventually stood, unsure of what else to do, and asked the audience to give another round of applause for President Obama. Once again, the entire room rose to its feet. Not out of loyalty, but respect. Even those who disagreed with him found themselves clapping. Trump looked around, realizing the tide had fully turned. He whispered something to the host, then stood and walked off the stage without another word. Later that night, clips of the event spread everywhere. But what stayed with people wasn't the confrontation. It was how Obama ended it, calmly and gracefully, without throwing a single insult. That was what made it unforgettable. In the days that followed, journalists, analysts, and everyday people reflected on what they had seen. Some praised Obama's composure, others criticized Trump's reaction, but nearly everyone agreed on one thing. That moment revealed character. Under those bright lights, people didn't just see two presidents clash. They saw a father, a son, and a man, reminding them that leadership is more than titles or power. It's about self-control, At a small community event later on, Obama was asked about that night. He smiled and said that sometimes the loudest lesson comes from the quietest response. The line spread quickly, striking a chord. His message wasn't just for the Trumps. It was for everyone watching. Parents raising children in a noisy world. Young people trying to find their voice amid shouting. Leaders who confuse control with compassion. He wanted people to understand that true strength isn't about domination. It's about understanding. About knowing when to stand firm and when to step back with grace. Even the question he directed at Barron wasn't meant as cruelty. It was a mirror, showing what happens when imitation replaces identity. Obama didn't need to humiliate anyone. He simply revealed the truth calmly and deliberately. After the event, Barron reportedly stayed quiet for days. No interviews, no statements. And maybe that silence wasn't defeat. Maybe it was reflection. Every young person makes mistakes. What matters is whether they learn from them. That was the deeper lesson of the night. When patience is tested, when someone mocks or challenges you, don't let anger lead. Pause. Breathe. Respond with dignity. The moment you let someone control your emotions, you hand them your power. That's why Obama's calm was so powerful. While others shouted, he listened. While others attacked, he taught. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that real leadership doesn't shout to be heard. It earns silence through respect. As the lights dimmed in that Washington hall and the night came to an end, the image that stayed with people wasn't the confrontation. It was the contrast. Anger versus calm. Mockery versus grace. And that quiet walk off the stage. A man who didn't just win an argument, but won the room. And that's the heart of the story. No matter who you are, where you come from, or what name you carry, respect never goes out of style. Dignity never fades, and the calmest person in the room is usually the one in control. Obama's final act that night wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding everyone watching that true leadership doesn't need to shout. It simply needs to stand tall, stay kind, and walk away with grace.